Glad to have you with us now for the start of this edition of The Public Square from the American Policy Roundtable. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the work of this organization, look us up online at aproundtable.org to learn more. And of course, this program can always be heard, this program and others, by the way, at thepublicsquare.com. All right, let's get started today. Dave Zanotti is here, Rob Walgate, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, Jeff Sanders, and Melanie Elsey. And we'll get to all of them here as a part of our discussion today, Dave. But we have a very serious note to begin on.
Wayne, the purpose of this conversation is a little challenging, so we want to remind folks that if you've got kids in the room, please, at this stage in the game, it would be good to either hit pause if you're listening on our phone app, or if you're on one of your favorite podcast providers, and either come back to this program when the kids are out of the room, or maybe find something for the kids to do. The words we're going to use today, we're going to be very, very careful with, but still, you may not be ready with your family for a conversation of this level. So we want there to be a clear warning, and we'll repeat this as we go along for people that are coming into the conversation, because we want to certainly be sensitive, because so many families do gather around the table and listen to this week's edition of the Public Square. So this is one that you can't do a whole lot of gathering unless your kids are already ready for the conversation. You've already had the conversation about a four-letter word called rape, R-A-P-E, because the conversation we're talking about here is the connection between rape and abortion. So let me throw out just again the premise of this conversation is that there's a lot of words. There are a lot of words in the marketplace right now, and they have to do with the question of the Dobbs decision. We're still involved with the backlash, the undertow, if you will, of all of that. And so there's still a lot of questions, a lot of complications. And the hard cases are being discussed again in multiple places. We've got ballot issues that have already happened, and we have ballot issues that have that are coming up. And then we obviously have a presidential campaign where this is being discussed. So we're going to try to get into all of that. But one more disclaimer, and this is particularly for IRS and Federal Justice Department agents that are listening, and election officials and others that would like to try to entrap us into some inappropriate behavior, not that it would be illegal, but perhaps would be someone getting out of the right box, right line, or lane. There is nothing in this conversation at which point in time we are going to tell anyone who to vote for. And in fact, we're not. If we mention any candidates, it's only because of things they have said in their quotes. We will talk about the discussion about rape and abortion as it was held in the most recent presidential debate. That should not be taken in any way, shape, or form as an attempt for us to tell you who to vote for. All of us here have strong opinions, which we will not share with you, because it's none of your business. And just like you having your opinions about who you're going to vote for is none of ours, and we're not going to ask you. That's not what we do here. But we can talk about an issue, and we must talk about an issue. And if that gets us into trouble, then fine. That's not the question. It's not a question of courage. It's a question of wanting to play this game according to the rules, because we, the people, make up the rules, and we believe in the rule of law. And there's laws we'd like to change, but until those laws are changed, we're going to do everything we can to abide by them, because our intention is not to get away with something, and we're not attempting to influence the outcome of something on the sly. That's not what we do. And after 45 years, the IRS knows that, but every now and then, you get new agents, so we got to make sure people understand. And the Justice Department, you got people understand. All right, there's a lot of people out there who want to silence people because they get their toes on the line on something. So we wanted to have that in play also.
And it's important that these facts are on the table.
Yeah.
And that we can have this conversation in a way where it's not politicized or sensationalized. It's about facts. And unfortunately, in many of these subjects today, the facts aren't included, and it's just 30-second sound bites. And no one benefits from that.
It's a lot of emotion. It's a lot of stories that may or may not be true, but the actual facts are often left out.
So let's go back with a little bit of history. And Jeff, you and I were talking about this during staff. And,
Sure.
And I know that the Civil War is a strong point for you in your historical research. Let's go back a number of years before the Civil War to the Missouri Compromise of 1850. The United States Congress decided to draw a line on a very difficult subject, the subject of slavery. And that's subject, really, the word is slavery. That was the manifestation of the question of personhood. The United States had a serious problem. We were a house divided. A number of people, for whatever reasons, profit, bad thinking, bad science, bigotry, hatred, you could list a whole bunch of reasons. And some, because they culturally fell into it, they were involved in the slave industry. Now, it doesn't matter what the reason was, they're all wrong. Period. End of conversation. So that's not a question. But slavery was really a representation, the manifestation of a much deeper question about personhood. And as hard as it is to come to terms with, people in this country actually held in their head the idea, some did, that Black people were somehow lesser in their personhood than white people. Saying that out loud makes me want to throw up.
Right.
It's a terrible thought. It's on top of that, it's just plain stupid. Particularly if you read the Bible, and a lot of people in the South that read the Bible held that thought in their head and tried to use the Bible to justify it.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance on display.
Yeah, it's just terrible. But there's no excuse. We've been through this. We all understand that. So Congress decided, because they couldn't get consensus, they would draw a line. And the line was a piece of legislation called the Missouri Compromise. And it said, here's the line. If you are above this line or east of this line or west of this line, you're either a person or you're not a person. You can have slavery north of this line. You can't have slavery south of this line. And that basic ruling, because it sounds a lot like a judicial ruling that was made into legislation, sort of held the line for a number of years, but not for long, because the slave interests weren't satisfied. And so, using the efforts of others, they came forward with the idea of popular sovereignty. That was sort of like the next level of compromise. And popular sovereignty was, let's do this. Let's drop the Missouri Compromise. Let's drop the line. And let's say, in those new developing territories, let the people decide. Just, you go out there, you decide you want to live there, you cast your vote. And if you vote slave, your state's slave. If you vote free, your state's free. And so that's what they did. They pulled off the line. And instantly, the wagons started to roll.
Yeah, the Missouri Compromise only delayed the onset of bloodshed. With the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, they repealed the whole Missouri Compromise and said, well, no, anything west.
I think I might have the date wrong on the Missouri Compromise.
Yeah, it was 1820.
20, yeah,
1820.
Sorry. I knew it wasn't more than 4 years.
Sorry.
I said 50, sorry.
No problem. So with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, they said, well, we're going to erase that line for many reasons, and we're going to say that anybody west of Missouri is going to be up for grabs. So whoever's going to populate that area, Kansas, and nobody really wanted to go into Nebraska with slaves, but Kansas still seemed rather appealing. Then we're going to let whoever, let the best side win, the side with the most guns.
Was what it turned out
to. And passion. And it turned out to be called Bleeding or Bloody Kansas for the next several years, leading right up to the Civil War.
So what happened was now again, I'm sorry for misquoting the date, because it took roughly 34 years. It held for a pretty good amount of time.
Yep.
Not as long as Roe versus Wade.
Right.
50 years, but it held for 34 years. And there were pressures against it always. But okay, so the political debate shifted. They pulled the line.
They never solved anything.
The wagons went out, and the idea was the last man standing who isn't shot is still going to be there to pass the initial laws that will create the territory into a state. We'll put up a constitution, and the constitution will include slavery or it won't, and they started killing each other. That's what happened. That's called Bloody Kansas or Bleeding Kansas.
Yeah, that's what Congress did.
That's what now, ultimately, the matter was resolved through a civil war. Ultimately. Now, there were other steps that were taken, other constitutions that were passed that got the states actually into the Union, but we'll save you all those historical details. But the point is, Congress drew a line. The federal government drew a line, but it couldn't hold. Now, the Roe versus Wade decision is very much like that line.
Mm.
The court drew a line in 1973 and said, here's the line. And the line eventually eroded to the place where if you were clever in your language, in the way that you applied that ruling, it became abortion on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy for virtually any reason. Now, this trimester setup was still there, but it could be skipped over. Life and health of the mother became a very expansive conversation. The industry of abortion morphed into whatever they had to do to make the line as meaningless as possible. But there was a line, and the line was this: nobody in the nation can pass a law that violates Roe versus Wade. That was the line. Roe was the line. Abortion through all 9 months. Now here comes Dobbs, the Dobbs decision, and the court erases that line. The wall falls. Just like when the Kansas-Nebraska Act fell and the line was removed, the wagon started to roll. When Roe fell, the wagons started to roll. It was a reactionary period in American history. People reacted. And that's what we've seen happening since 2022. We're only 2 years away, 24 months away from it, and look what's happened. You've had abortion laws passed and rulings in virtually 50 states. In 24 months, it's been ferocious. The activity has been all over the place.
But when you think about when the Dobbs ruling came out, it had been 50 years. So anyone under the age of roughly 60 in the United States had known no other way, because they really didn't have memory of it before the age of 10 or even an understanding, probably more like anyone under the age of 65. So you are going to have that reactionary period. Like, what's going to happen now?
And the question is, in the reaction, have we yet gotten enough of a solid public debate on this? And have enough facts come out that in the midst of all this, we're even having an intelligent conversation? But what we've got is a massive amount of reaction. Ironically, the first state that reacted to the falling of Dobbs was Kansas.
Well, was there motivation? Well, let's seize the opportunity. Now that abortion has been taken out of the federal system, we, the state legislature, can restrict it as much as we would like. I mean,
they tried a constitutional amendment, and that was very restrictive, or reasonably restrictive. But what happened was they did not see the backlash or even the undertow of what would happen when people suddenly realized, oh my gosh, the line's been removed. That's changed. That makes people uncomfortable. And then they were very subject to the manipulation of saying, now that this law will take away every right. In other words, you had all the rights you needed before. Now you get none of the rights. And can you handle a change that big? And so people went out, because this was a constitutional piece. They went out and they voted no. They reacted. They voted no. How the debate was like just a matter of weeks, months. It was over so fast, but it happened in Kansas. So Kansas, a state which has been pro-life for a long time, is suddenly a place where abortion prevails.
And that statement requires much more discussion. We'll get to it here on The Public Square. Thanks for tuning in, and please pass the word about this program. You'll find us online at thepublicsquare.com. Let's return to this edition of The Public Square now, as the team discusses the fact that Kansas is now a state which has been captured, in essence, by those who are pro-abortion in the post-Dobbs era. So we'll pick up the conversation with Jeff Sanders. By the way, Melanie Elsey is part of the team and discussion here as always, and she is on location on assignment, so glad that Melanie could still be with us today. Jeff?
I guess I'm still surprised that so many people were reactionary to a state legislature restricting abortion, because even before the Dobbs decision in 2022, there were states that did restrict abortion. For example, am I right?
Well,
the state of Ohio had the heartbeat bill. There were several other states.
But none of those laws were in effect.
Really? Okay.
No, none of those laws were in effect. Those were all trigger laws. Once Roe falls, then the heartbeat bill would go into effect. Because it couldn't go into effect because again, the line was still there. So the pro-life movement, in thinking that they were getting one step ahead of the game, passed these trigger laws. What they didn't see, nobody saw. look, this is nobody's fault. Nobody saw this.
Mm-hmm.
That the abortion industry would smartly claim to the world, you've lost all your rights. Roe protected all your rights. Now all your rights are gone. You have no rights. Now you're going to be victims of your opponents at every level. And the reaction to that, without any factual basis, was, oh, whoa. People started to dig their heels in. So when the trigger laws happened, automatically, a trigger law is this. If Roe falls, the heartbeat type legislation goes into effect. That was way too much for people to process. And they dug their heels in and they said no. They were very upset. And so when people came in trying to get this thing resolved, all we had was a big fight. The cannons were still rolling onto the field. And cannons in a wooded battlefield are dangerous things. Boy, they start blowing up trees. The next thing you got smoke everywhere. You can't see a doggone thing. And the fog of war very quickly captured Kansas, and it captured Ohio as well. Because a year later, Ohio's in a position, a solidly pro-life state for 40 years. And suddenly, Ohio capitulates into a situation where it adopts one of the most radical pro-abortion language in their constitution that we've yet seen in the country. Now, how do you go from being the most pro-life state to go completely the opposite direction? Unless the abortion industry is doing a tremendous job at amplifying the reactionary area of fear, and the pro-life community wasn't ready for that kind of a fight. So now, here we come into another election year. And the point is this. Are we getting any closer to the facts, or are we still in that mode of reaction, back and forth reaction?
Emotional storytelling. That's what I tie it to, emotional storytelling, because stories are told, and some of the stories are horrific. The issue at hand is there aren't facts to back up those stories, and no one's willing to do the hard work to fact check the stories that are being told. And the stories that are being told, they are horrific, and no one I know in America would want to see any of them happen.
So let's now bring in the subject of where we wanted to sort of pick on one of those narrative stories, and that's the question of rape and abortion. Again, warning to parents listening that may have family members that are too young for this conversation, please don't turn off your radio. And if you must, come back and visit us at the Public Square and pick up the broadcast right there at publicsquare.com, or go on our free phone app, and you can hear this conversation in full there. Or maybe see if you can get kids to do something else. We'll give you a second while you do that. And here's our point. We're going to pick up on this subject because this particular word seems to immediately change the climate in the room, the temperature in the room. And it's one that people quickly, who are advocating for a limitless abortion policy in the states and at the federal level, will quickly basically connect rape and abortion. And we want to disconnect those words and ask, is the premise that because there is rape in our society, there must be abortion on demand for any reason throughout all 9 months of pregnancy? Are these two things accurately connected? Again, another disclaimer. There is no way we could say out loud, we don't have the words to quantify correctly how wrong rape is. It's absolutely wrong. Sexual compulsion at any level is absolutely wrong. Non-negotiable. We get that. We get that loudly. We get that clearly. And we are certain about what we're saying on this. And there should be no question mark about that. The question is, how does rape connect to the question of abortion? And what we've discovered in creating a book that we're about ready to release called Abortion in America is that it's almost, at this stage in the game, it seems near impossible to be able to quantify how many people are actually utilizing abortion as a remedy to rape, because the reporting simply has not been done. So whenever people are on a platform talking about the absolute necessity that we have to have abortion because of rape, we don't have the data to be able to, that seems logical to people, but we want to caution you that if you go looking for research numbers, they're not there. Melanie, let me bring you in on this conversation, because as our National Legislative Director, you check all of our math and create most of the tests. So does this make sense?
Well, it does. I think people have to be very careful when they're listening to statistics that are being reported in terms of rape, and especially in the context of the conversation on abortion. Um, those incident levels are very low, and there is a difference even in terms. We have to have a common understanding of some definitions, because even when there's reporting on incidents of rape, there's a difference between the terms prevalence over incidence. Prevalence would be how many people have experienced that crime. Number of incidents would be because some people experience that crime in a if they're in a violent relationship, it might be multiple times for one person. So you have to kind of statistically separate out those two terms. There's also, when you're talking about the crime of rape, it can involve men and women. It can involve different types of rape that would not have any possibility of leading to a pregnancy, which, if the conversation from one side of the debate is trying to push the idea that rape is prevalent, the statistics don't bear that out in terms of the conversation as it relates to abortion.
I never would have thought that we'd be in a position that we have to be describing the definition of rape, but we do, because the definition, according to the FBI, which is the agency that does the federal crime reporting on rape in the United States, that's the cumulative place where you find those numbers, changed the definition in 2013. Prior to 2013, the definition of rape was the one that everybody holds in their mind, which is that there's a forcible activity that could result in pregnancy. And so we'll leave it at that. Today, the definition of rape includes sexual imposition in a number of ways, many of which would not result in pregnancy, but it's still sexual imposition and activity.
Someone could just type into a web browser FBI definition of rape.
Yes.
And that would keep us from having to read the definition fully on air.
We can't.
A lot of,
thank you, Alan.
Over the FCC airwaves or whatever.
That's an executive producer move, and that's a brilliant one. Thank you.
Yes, so
right.
Look it up.
My face wouldn't have to get any redder than it is right now. Okay.
Yes, but the point being, to your point, it is a broadened definition,
much broader,
that still certainly includes crime.
Yes.
and is utterly wrong.
Right.
But it's broader than what the common understanding was.
But because of that definition change, that you'll see in the FBI statistics that in about a 4-year period, rape more than doubled in America. Well, that makes sense because we made a much wider berth for what it means.
And Alan, they also changed the terminology from rape on the research side of things to the phrase contact sexual violence. And that has 4 separate categories, and in each category there are subcategories. So it's just important to keep in mind that when you're reading anything, you have to understand how that source is defining what you're reading.
And I don't think we've assigned a value judgment to the change. We're just noting that it has been changed.
Thank you. We're not doing
Correct.
that because, as we've said before, whether it's the old definition of rape or any form of sexual imposition, it's wrong, period. And it might be easier to report it in different ways, but that's not, nor are we trying to dilute the problem. In fact, just the opposite. I think common sense across the board would tell us that many of these experiences are never reported, so that the actual incidences of what we are all living with in the real world are higher than what's reported, period, because a lot of these situations are not reported or not known. So it's wrong. It's there. The question is the linkage between rape and abortion. And the reason that's significant is because rape is often introduced as a predicate reason for why we must have legalized abortion. Now, that may or may not be what a person holds to, but we want to test that just a little bit more to help it make more sense.
And we will do just that coming up in a moment here on The Public Square. That's Dave Zanotti, along with Melanie Elsey and Jeff Sanders and Rob Walgate and Alan C. Duncan, all a part of the team here at The Public Square. More coming up. And by the way, if you joined us late, please keep in mind the fact that this program is not necessarily for the young. And keep that in mind as you may have young listeners nearby. We'll continue in a moment. And also, you can join us online at thepublicsquare.com.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
You're listening to the weekly edition of the Public Square from the American Policy Roundtable, and we're grateful for each and every listener. I think most of you are probably listening on radio right now, but some of you are online, and many others are using the smartphone app. If you haven't downloaded that free app, it's a very convenient way to listen and take the program with you on the go to listen to at your convenience. So download the free smartphone app called The Public Square in your respective app store. Okay, back to this important discussion now. Melanie.
There's another element of this conversation that needs to be understood when you're listening to any type of media reporting on rape as it applies to abortion, is whenever they're quoting statistics or fractions or percentages, those numbers generally come from surveys. And so they're surveying people who are willing to participate in a survey, and then they extrapolate that result from that conversation to the entire female population. So, for example, if you're surveying 5,000 or 6,000 women out of a population pool of 100 million women, that's a very controversial, in my opinion, way of saying this statistic applies in general to all women.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just push back on that just slightly, isn't that the way that all polling or statistics is generally done? I mean, you can't speak to every single citizen. So you take a sample and then you ask them the question. I mean, isn't that just basically how that's done?
That is an excellent question, Alan, and it's an excellent point to fit into the context of what we're talking about, because generally surveys aren't as intense in its subject as you're trying to get someone who has been the victim of a crime, maybe still living in a violent situation, trying to get someone to be honest. So the rape surveys are criminal behavior victim related process and questions, and trying to get people to come forward, trying to get people to be honest or clear. This is not your typical survey because you are dealing with survey respondents who have been victims. So you have to get them to agree to participate. Maybe they're still living in the circumstance with the same perpetrator, for example. Maybe it's an abuse situation. And so this is not a typical survey where you're getting someone's opinion on a political candidate or their favorite grocery store or something simple. This is a behavioral survey.
To Dave's earlier point, so the numbers could actually be bigger than are even reported.
Yes, they could.
Yeah.
Or they could be more inaccurate too, because you may have someone who would even go to the point of embellishing to try to be a part of something because it's behavioral.
But let me also to this point, one of the studies that we've been looking at has been quoted in at least one commercial spot and others in regards to a federal study through the CDC as it applies to this very subject. Now, the survey was done in published, I believe, in 2016. And this particular study is very transparent in acknowledging the fact in its methodologies that they did the work over 2016-17, and then they attempted to repeat the work in 2018 and gave up. The reason that they did was because getting people to be able to talk about this conversation was extremely difficult. As a polling methodology, they had to introduce the subject matter. Now, understand, they're talking to people either on a landline or a hard line, and they're asking permission. Can you realize how far you'd have to go in an introductory set of comments to ask if someone would be willing to talk about this subject. Now, it appears that they were very gracious. According to the methodology that they had, the callers that were making the calls out on the survey were all female, right, by design, and that they gave people exit ramps in a continual basis if they were not comfortable. They tried to be, but these are all the things that they were incorporating and knowing how difficult it was going to be. And ultimately, they had to call far more people than they anticipated to be able to get survey respondents. But then in addition to that, that when they wanted to try to do further research into it, they had to give up because people just they were not comfortable talking about this. So it's a very difficult thing to get solid, hard data on. So when people start flashing percentages from a campaign perspective, whether it's a ballot issue or an elected position, you got to be careful. You got to ask them, excuse me, which survey are you talking about? Did you read the methodology of that survey? Do you know do you know the details and the facts, or are you just quoting what you were told?
And David, sometimes when they do even a random sampling, you also have to be careful because some of the surveys the respondents are both men and women. And you have to make sure that the results that are being reported and the information you're looking at, is it specified that it was women only, that it was a criminal behavior that could result in pregnancy. Otherwise, the data is completely irrelevant to the topic of abortion.
Now, let's put this into some kind of a quantifiable basket as rape and it relates to abortion, because the fact is real. There are laws that are out there being passed and or debated that have the question about whether abortion should be permitted in regards to the question of rape. That's a deeper question that we're not going to get into in regards to all of its ramifications right now. Going back to our first illustration about the line that was drawn by the court in Roe being removed, now people have to debate through that. Under Roe, it wasn't an issue because abortion was legal based on Roe and other decisions for all 9 months throughout pregnancy for basically any reason if you use the right words. All right, so that's where we were. Now the line's going, and people have to decide all these things. Now, first off, most Americans are like, I hate this because I don't have any intention of being anything about abortion or abortion debate. And now you're telling me it's my responsibility to either vote on this or to support candidates one way or the other. I don't want to talk about this. There's a lot of people that feel that way. They don't want anything to do with it because they don't see it touching. This is tough.
Dave, I would help encourage our listeners to have a desire to understand this portion of the conversation, because we have experienced the ballot issues where very serious stories were told and promulgated through the media that convinced our brothers and sisters in Christ to think that it was okay to make a pro-abortion vote on a ballot issue because of this part of the conversation. So it's very helpful for us to understand where the information is coming from on the other side so that we know how to discuss it with our friends and family.
To that point, Melanie, the Guttmacher Institute is an organization that is basically founded through and in support of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood being the largest abortion provider in the United States and really the driving force of the abortion industry. The more you study the abortion industry, you recognize it is an industry. They do a very good job at what they're doing, and they're doing a really good job right now in expanding their agenda across the country. Now, we stand opposed to everything that they support. Well, I would say almost. There might be one thing that we agree on or something. I mean, I'm sure that they hate rape and we do too. Okay, philosophically, we probably have some points where we agree for the common good on some things, but we're not in their camp in any way, shape, or form. We're on opposite sides of this. They admit through Guttmacher, and there's only one statistic that they ever have provided. It's an old survey, and it's the one that is repeated endlessly, that the relationship between rape and abortion is 1%. They did a survey with 800 women a number of years ago who were abortion patients, and they found out through that survey that 1% of the women said that the reason they got an abortion was rape, 1%. So you ask yourself, why is on the 1% basis is it seemed like rape is always the thing that is talked about and the highest moment of the conversation, the highest level of rhetoric, rape and incest. And Guttmacher says rape is 1% of the reason people come to have abortion, and incest is 0.5% or 0.5%. So the question is, why is something that is so down the line in regards to actual activity so high in priority when it comes to politics and salesmanship?
Well, we must take a break right now, and we will come back to this point, though, on the Public Square. And a reminder that this program is not intended for younger listeners. You can find us online at thepublicsquare.com. More coming up. We understand that our conversation today is a very tough one to have, but a necessary one, and I'm glad the team here at the Public Square is willing to address it. So let's continue now. Once again, Melanie joins us while she's on the road today. So Melanie, glad to have you with us.
We're talking about the low percentage of rape cases, as Guttmacher is reporting, from actual abortion procedures that have been performed.
Right, a survey.
Correct. So we also have to keep in mind that states, the majority of states, already have laws on the books that allow for exceptions in cases of rape and incest. I'm not saying we agree with that or disagree with that, but that's the reality.
Most of the states that have restricted permission on access to abortion, because they're not bans, there are no bans, full bans.
Right.
And anyone that says there are or tries to name them after somebody is just, that's rhetoric. But the rape and incest exception, as well as the life and health of the mother exception is absolute. There has never been a state that has banned that ever. It's always been permitted, and it's still permitted today, and it's still permitted today across all 50 states. And most of the states that are restricting access at some level to abortion, not banning it, do include the exception for rape and incest. Not everyone, but most of them do.
I have listened to testimonies of individuals who were conceived out of rape, whose mothers did not abort. So, on the life side, there are stories of people who have very full lives and have a love for the Lord and have families and, where they were conceived and the mother chose life, even though the point of conception was the result of a violent crime. So there are two sides of that coin, but we have to understand that when we're talking about policy, state policy as it applies to the abortion issue, the majority of states have especially the states that restrict abortions, have exceptions for rape and incest.
Let's tie this up just a little bit more, because what we're finding is in the campaign to create an environment of full unrestricted abortion, we will hear one or two or three examples of a particular person who was raped, and it's always wrong and it's always grievous, and they, in the state in which they lived, for whatever reason, under any circumstance, whatever the circumstance was, they could not get access to abortion. Or we'll hear about the incest situation of a young teen. And then the acknowledgement is that in that particular state, they could not get an abortion. Let's be very clear about this. Right now, at the way that the laws are set up across the country, abortion may not be convenient in every state, but it is abundantly available for anyone who wants access. Let's be very clear about that. Now, and if you look at the map, it's a stretch to say it's even a day's drive if someone is in that particular circumstance. So the notion that somehow these instances could not possibly be resolved is simply not true. Some would say, well, if a person lives in Ohio, they shouldn't have to drive to Indiana. Well, if that's the case, then why is Planned Parenthood putting their brand new clinics, like in Pittsburgh, Kansas, right on the border of the state so that people from all over can go there? They're making an industry out of destination abortions. So it may be a realignment of the drive time, but the concept that there's no access is absurd.
When I was in high school, I believe it was Bill Clinton that coined the phrase safe, legal, and rare.
Safe, legal, and rare.
When did the rare part drop from the platform?
To absolute.
To absolute.
Enshrined.
Yeah. I mean, because I think about then when I was in high school, and
a great point.
It was talked about, and safe, legal, and rare was discussed at length. And then I think of the event that was held with Gavin Newsom earlier this year, and he wouldn't denounce abortion up into the 9th month. In the most recent presidential debate, Vice President Harris would not go on the record and say she would denounce abortion in the 7th, 8th, 9th month. So the rare aspect has been totally pushed by the wayside.
The position that was presented in that debate that there are actually abortions that happen after a live birth was dismissed as if that doesn't even exist, and there's no law in the books that permits it. Wait a second, whoa. There are organizations that exist of people in the organization who are live survivors of an abortion. They're grown up now. And they talk about, excuse me, this is exactly what happened to me. I mean, I don't remember it, but I can tell you, here's the evidence. And then they'll tell you their story.
Well, I think another question that can be asked of folks who would consider themselves pro-abortion, I think we could ask them perhaps, if we made exceptions for the life of the mother, the physical health of the mother, for rape and for incest, would you be willing to consider banning all other forms of abortion or all other reasons for abortion? And just ask that question and just let it sit there.
All right, but then they would say absolutely not.
Alan, that's a great question to ask. I would actually rephrase that question. If the person you're asking, if the candidate you're asking, for example, who's running for office, is pushing for abortion rights, I would step up to the microphone at a forum and ask, if we set aside life of the mother, health of the mother, rape and incest, those exceptions were already a part of statute, where would you draw the line on when abortion should not be? And get that candidate to admit that they are in favor of aborting a fully viable baby up until the point of birth.
And that's in essence what happened, right, in the presidential debate. That's the point that you're making, is that they will not answer that question because when they talk about reestablishing Roe, that's code. What you're describing, Melanie, is Roe. Abortion for any reason for all 9 months of pregnancy.
All 9 months.
And I'm even taking it out of the realm of politics for a moment and just asking our friends and neighbors to think about that as well. Mm-hmm. You know, because we can, of course, we need to ask politicians to understand where they stand on this. But I'd like to know where my neighbors, my friends, my family, what do you think about this?
And then the answer will then quickly move from the scientific and the strategic and the medical and the point of law and consensus. Here's what happens. The government shouldn't tell me what to do with my body. This is about my right to autonomy, so you shouldn't even have the right to ask that question. There should be no law that tells a woman when she can't do what she wants to do with her body. That's where Vice President Harris went in the debate. It's autonomy. That's where the Ohio law, it's autonomy. I understand the logic of that. Sure. It would be nice if we could start there and be honest with each other, saying basically what your position is that whatever else you think is in the human womb that we call pregnancy has absolutely no personhood and no rights whatsoever, and that bodily autonomy means you can do whatever you want in complete disregard of that matter. It's not a person, it's not an embryo, it's not a fetus, it is a pregnancy, and you have full authority to stop that pregnancy at any point in time in the name of autonomy. I have no problem with someone stating the argument that way, because that at least is honest, because there is no place where they will accept a limit.
That's true.
All right, let me hit the pause button for just a moment as we are about to take a break here. And it just works out that way that some of you have to leave us at this time. If that's the case, we have a final segment coming up that you don't want to miss. And you can catch it online, if not on the radio, at thepublicsquare.com and with our smartphone app.
Have you had a chance to listen to the Kids on the Square episode, Career Day?
I'm going to prove that the President of the United States isn't the most important job in America.
Ha! There's no way.
Join us for discoveries.
What's all the fuss about this building today?
55 of the most important, influential, well-educated, and bravest men in the United States are in that room right now deciding the fate of our nation.
A wackadoo review.
My favorite grannies is Bingo. Yes. And Billy being grannies.
And plenty of laughs.
Yes! Victory! Oh, well, let's go. High five. High five. High five.
Don't push it.
Okay.
Kids on the Square aims to bless, encourage, and educate the next generation of American children by creating resources for families to connect and communicate in this digital era. So what are you waiting for? Grab a friend, share this episode with your family, and join us today at Kids on the Square.
As you listen to the Public Square, hope you know that we have all of our programs archived online. You can go back and listen to any of them at thepublicsquare.com, and also check out ivoters.com for candidate information, nonpartisan information, and ballot issues around the country. ivoters.com. Dave Zanotti, back to you.
We have so much more to talk about on the subject, and we are going to be talking about it on the Public Square. And if you're exhausted by this, please don't blame us. We didn't put all those ballot issues out across the country right now on this because millions of people, hundreds of millions of people are having to face this on the ballot right now. And it is the biggest issue in the presidential campaign. So don't blame us. What we're trying to do is to hold sanity.
It is the biggest issue in the presidential campaign that's being talked about, but there is no realistic chance on either side that there's federal abortion legislation that passes and makes it to the president's desk. There's zero.
Okay, you just wanted to see my head explode because this is because that's the true truth of all of this is at the presidential campaign level. It's all cannon fodder.
It's a wedge issue that one side was accused of for years as using, right, and the other side now is taken and is using as a wedge issue. There
is no chance that this Congress is going to come up with a methodology whereby they are going to redraw the line. All right, go back to the beginning of the broadcast, if you would, please, and think about what we talked about with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, what happened when the government drew a line and then they erased the line. There's no way in the world that the United States Congress is going to reach enough numbers, majority in the House or 60 votes in the Senate to present a package. Furthermore, there's no way for them to draw one up. You could, when people say that I will sign a bill that will restore Roe, I like to say, excuse me, before you would you write that bill up for me? Can I look at that, please? Because I've studied Roe for 50 years. Do you know how vast? Do you have any? Where would you begin in statutory language to convert those decisions in Roe and Doe and others into a law? How would you do that?
Not only could you not get 60 in the Senate, you couldn't get 50 in the Senate, or a majority in the House to have this done. Even if you only needed 50 in the Senate, it would not happen. And I'm saying that for either side. I don't care which party's in control. You're going to have certain R's and D's that would not touch this no matter what it says.
Well, if it could even get drawn up, it wouldn't get out of committee. Now, that's the so when these political candidates on all sides are telling you about what they would sign or what they would, that's pure manipulation.
They're using it also as a distraction from the other issues, such as the economy and the immigration issue and a host of others. They're trying to force this issue to be centerpiece when we all know it's not going to go anywhere in any type of federal policy.
And they're doing it because they're trying to attract, as wedge issues do, a certain percentage of voters in certain precincts in certain states that will vote for certain candidates. That's the reality. Now, some people are going to say, You pro-life people, you can dish it, but you can't take it. You use this as a wedge issue for how many years? And now you're getting what you had coming to you. You know what? They're right. They're right. Abortion should never have been a wedge issue. Now, what goes around comes around. We have to be careful. They're right. So now we've got to deal with it. Now let's go back to what we can do. But let me summarize one more time. We were talking about the connection of rape to abortion because it's such an emotional subject and it's so often used as the idea that you cannot restrict abortion because if you do, there'll be a grave injustice in regards to people who their autonomy was taken away from them and they were unable to resist the situation that created the pregnancy. And therefore, they should have a second chance at bodily autonomy. That's a discussion that we understand is out there. And in every premise that we put forward so far, if a law had that exemption in it, would the abortion community accept it? And the answer is no. They will not accept. They will not accept anything other than the reestablishment of Roe in its totality, which is abortion throughout 9 months for any reason, period, end of conversation. Okay, so we are at an impasse in that regard. So states are passing laws that are permitting abortion at limited levels. They're not banning abortion. They're permitting it at limited levels. And they are including, almost across the board, rape and incest exemptions. So in essence, the abortion industry is getting what they want, but they don't want to tell you that. And here's the other thing they don't want to tell you. There are more abortions happening in America right now annually than were happening under Roe. Pause for the sound of broken glass. The other side would like you to believe that abortions are on the decline and women are being persecuted and abused and denied their rights of autonomy. In fact, there are more abortions in America right now than there were at Roe.
Yep. None of the marketing on the abortion issue is true. And you're right. There are more abortions now under the Dobbs decision than there were happening per year under Roe. It's growing.
We had unlimited abortion for any reason throughout all 9 months of pregnancy in 50 states. Now we have 20 states that are permitted limiting access to abortions, while there's others that are doing totally unlimited. 9 have gone completely past Roe, where they're already more liberal than Roe. But the country is split up almost 50-50, and there's more abortions happening. How can that be?
It's because the boundary was removed. They said the boundary was removed and it took away their freedoms. The boundary was removed, and where there were weaknesses in statutes, those explosions took place. And plus, then on the other side, there was an overreaction to Dobbs. Like in Ohio, there was an overreaction to Dobbs. So Ohio put a constitutional amendment on the ballot. And even people who would consider themselves on the life side of the issue crossed over and voted in favor of that constitutional amendment. We have to think through differently how we talk to our family and friends about this issue. We have to begin asking questions on the pro-abortion side to peel back those layers so our friends and family understand that the pro-abortion industry isn't interested in what's good for women. They're interested in their own power and financial gain and all of that.
Their agenda is what's driving it. I want to be clear again. There are more abortions now than there were under Roe. And in essence, what's happening is the abortion industry is simply realigning their assets. They're just changing their strategy. Now, someone's yelling at the radio right now, tell them about the pills, That's another reason. 60% of abortions now are more convenient than ever because of chemical abortions, which happen in the first 10 weeks. Or they're supposed to be limited to the first 10 weeks for health purposes.
And that's another area why I don't feel they're being honest with the users of those pills about what is about to happen to their body.
Whole nother subject in regards to liability and questions there. But the point is that we're just starting on this. So let's wrap up again, summarizing. Rape is wrong. It's always wrong. Guttmacher and Planned Parenthood concede that 99% of the times that's not the reason why people come in and have an abortion. That's Planned Parenthood's own message. So why are we talking about it as if it's the most important part of all of this? There's something incongruous there. So there's something about the marketing that's off to manipulate this as a wedge issue for emotion. We're trying to get to the facts. We're not justifying anything. We're trying to get to the facts. We've got a book coming out, Abortion in America. It's going to be online very, very soon. Stay with us at aproundtable.org. Look for this at thepublicsquare.com. And it will also be in a print fact book. This is a big deal. And we've been spending over a year on research in this regard, and we are discovering things that are mind-boggling, like the fact that the 1% number is from a very old survey that involved 800 women who had abortions and were surveyed by Planned Parenthood and by Guttmacher. That's it. That's all we got. All right, that's where the 1% number comes from. It's not being recorded and filed in state health agencies. It's not there. All right. The other thing is, we know we've got ballot issues coming up. Quick plug, Rob, ivoters.com is almost ready, right?
Yeah,
all 50 states.
You can go to ivoters.com right now and see the issues in regards.
All the ballot issues are there. It's ready.
For abortion across the country right now that are up at ivoters.com. By the end of September, we will have all 50 states, State House to the White House.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And thank you for your support, which makes ivoters.com. And spread the word. You can share that with confidence. ivoters.com. All right. Thanks to the team here today. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Thank you for listening and supporting the work of the Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.